Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 567 in Francia. The good news? You're not a slave. The bad news? You're living in the rotting skeleton of the Roman Empire, and personal hygiene is more of a rumor than a habit. Your house is a drafty wooden hut with a thatched roof that leaks every time it rains, which is constantly. Forget running water, there isn't even a toilet, just a bucket and the nearest ditch. Central heating? Try a smoky fire pit in the middle of the floor, sharing warmth with your family and the goats you keep inside. The smell? Let's just say, even if scented candles had been invented, they wouldn't stand a chance against the perfume of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and something fermenting in the corner you really don't want to investigate. Your bed is a pile of straw crawling with tiny, biting roommates. Sleep isn't restful, it's an itchy battle you never win. But as you scratch at the welts and roll over in your creaking cot, remember, at least you're not royalty. Because in this world, wearing a crown is less about power and more about surviving a game where betrayal is currency, and losing means death. And that's where our story begins. Take a deep breath. Actually, don't. The air in 6th century Francia is thick with smoke, sweat, and the faint tang of damp straw. This isn't the Middle Ages you've seen in movies with stone castles and gallant knights. This is the raw, unpolished reality of a world clawing its way out of Rome's shadow. Your home, a wooden hut hammered together from rough planks, with a thatched roof that leaks every time the sky decides to weep, which is often. When the rain pours, it drips through the ceiling and turns the floor into a swamp of mud and straw. The wind whistles through the cracks, so you stuff the gaps with moss and whatever rags you can find, but the cold still bites. Forget indoor plumbing. The bathroom, as a bucket that gets dumped into the nearest ditch, and if you want water, you're walking to the stream with a clay jug and hoping nothing fell in to rot upstream. For heat, you've got a fire pit in the center of the room. It smokes constantly, choking the air and coating everything in soot, but without it, you'd freeze to death. The fire isn't just for you either. You're sharing that warmth with chickens, goats, maybe even a pig or two, because keeping animals inside is the only way to stop them from being stolen or eaten by wolves. The smell? It's a cocktail of wet wool, manure, and bodies that haven't seen a bath in months. Soap exists, but only the wealthy can afford it, and even then, it's harsh enough to strip your skin. You scrub with sand or just splash river water on your face and call it good. And your bed? Forget feathers or linen. It's a lumpy pile of straw stuffed in a sack, alive with fleas and lice. Sleep isn't rest. It's a truce you negotiate with the biting things crawling over your skin. But this is normal. This is life. And as miserable as it sounds, most people will never know anything else. Because if you're not a slave and you've got a roof, leaky or not, you're already doing better than a lot of your neighbours. And while you're huddled by the smoky fire, scratching at the flea bites and listening to the rain hammer the roof, somewhere out there, kings are fighting for power, queens are plotting their survival, and the fate of an entire kingdom is about to be decided. If you think life in your smoky hut is tough, imagine ruling a kingdom on the edge of collapse. Welcome to the world of the Frankish kings in the year 567. Just a few years ago, one man, King Clothar I, managed to pull the fractured Frankish lands together under a single crown. For a brief moment, it looked like stability might return. Then, as history loves to do, it all fell apart. Clothar D. rocked dead, and with his last breath, the unity he built crumbled. Instead of one kingdom, there were now 4. His sons carved it up like a feast, each one grabbing as much land and power as they could. But these weren't noble brothers sharing the load. These were rivals raised on ambition, suspicion, and the belief that only one could truly rule. Charibert, the eldest, sat in Paris. He was a king with a scandalous love life that made even his own bishops blush. Guntram, the calculating middle child, ruled Burgundy like a man playing a long chess game. Sigebert, in Austrasia, was the warrior scholar, ambitious, disciplined, and already dreaming of restoring Rome's lost glory. And then there was Chilperic, the youngest, impulsive, jealous, a man who measured success not just in land or gold, but in outshining his brothers at any cost. Their father's death didn't just divide the kingdom, it set off a cold war with swords. Alliances shifted overnight, armies marched, and every feast felt like it could end in bloodshed. And in the middle of this chaos, a single decision was about to light the fuse on a decades-long war. While his brothers married local noblewomen, Sigebert made a move that would change everything. He looked south to Spain, to a Visigothic princess named Brunhild. But he wasn't just picking a bride. He was picking a side in a game where marriage meant war, loyalty meant nothing, and a crown was never guaranteed to stay on your head. While his brothers were busy squabbling over scraps and marrying local noblewomen, or even their own servants, Sigebert wanted more. He wasn't content with just holding his corner of the kingdom. He wanted to send a message: I am the one destined to rule it all. To make that statement, he needed more than armies or gold. He needed a queen, not just any queen, but one whose very presence screamed power, and he knew exactly where to find her. South of the Frankish lands lay the kingdom of the Visigoths in Spain. Unlike the crumbling, smoke-filled halls of Francia, Spain still carried whispers of Rome, cities with paved streets, public baths, and a royal court dripping with sophistication. And at the heart of it all was Princess Brunhild. Brunhild wasn't just a pretty face in a silk gown. At around 18, she was educated, politically savvy, and the daughter of a king who taught her that a crown was more than jewelry, it was a weapon. She had grown up watching her mother wield influence in court, learning how power moved behind closed doors. When Sigebert's proposal arrived, Brunhild agreed, and in that moment, a young woman from sunny, cultured Spain was about to step into the raw, brutal world of the Franks. Sigebert's court in Metz scrambled to look the part. His palace was really a repurposed Roman building with crumbling walls, so they draped the halls in tapestries and rolled out their thickest rugs. A poet, Venantius Fortunatus, was hired to compose an epic wedding ode. He was new to the court and probably sweating through his tunic, trying to write verses about Cupid and Venus for an audience that still half-worshipped Thor. When Brunhild finally arrived, the scene was something out of legend. Her wagon train overflowed with treasure, gold, silver, fine fabrics, and jewels that sparkled like sunlight on water. The Frankish nobles stared. Was she just another piece of loot in a world obsessed with plunder, or was she something more? Sigebert's answer came fast. At 32, already a seasoned warrior, he looked at his bride and saw more than beauty. He saw an alliance, a future, and a way to eclipse every one of his brothers. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration. Austrasia would rise, and Sigebert would be the king who brought back the glory of Rome. But that message didn't echo in empty halls. It landed like a sword in the heart of his youngest brother, Chilperic. And jealousy mixed with ambition is a poison that can topple kingdoms. Sigebert's marriage to Brunhild didn't just make headlines, it set off a chain reaction that would rip the Frankish kingdoms apart, and no one felt the sting more than his youngest brother, Chilperic. Chilperic was ambitious but insecure, forever living in the shadows of his older brothers. When Sigebert paraded his Spanish princess and her mountain of treasure, Chilperic's pride curdled into rage. He needed to match that power move, and fast. But there was one problem. His queen wasn't a princess at all. She was Fredegund, a woman who had started life as a kitchen slave. Fredegund's story was brutal and brilliant. Born into a world of famine, plague, and constant death, she learned early that survival belonged to the cunning. She clawed her way up from the lowest rung of society, scrubbing floors, serving the queen, catching the king's eye, and finally securing a place at Chilperic's side. It wasn't luck. It was calculation, charm, and a cold, ruthless intelligence that scared even seasoned warriors. But to the outside world, Chilperic's court looked weak. While Sigebert was forging alliances with foreign royalty, Chilperic was in love with a former servant. In a society where marriage was politics and power, this was an insult. To fix his image, Chilperic made a desperate move. He sent his perfectly respectable wife, Queen Ordovera, off to a convent and promised himself to higher prestige. That's when Brunhild's sister, Galswintha, entered the story. A Visigothic princess like Brunhild, she was renowned for her beauty and royal blood. To win her hand, Chilperic offered an outrageous wedding gift, 5 of his richest cities. Entire territories handed over as a mourning gift. It was a gamble that screamed desperation, but it worked. Galswintha arrived with wagons of gold and silver, bringing with her the kind of legitimacy Chilperic craved. But if you've learned anything about the Franks by now, you know a royal wedding is never the end of the story. It's the beginning of a bloodbath. Only months into the marriage, Galswintha was found dead in her bed, strangled with the very jewels Chilperic had given her. 3 days later, Fredegund married him in the same villa where the body had been discovered. The Frankish world erupted. Nobles whispered, bishops muttered. Every rumour pointed to one name, Fredegund. Whether she gave the order, did the deed herself, or simply smiled in the shadows, the message was unmistakable. This was no accident. For Brunhild, it wasn't just politics, it was personal. Her sister had been murdered, and in that moment, a rivalry ignited between two queens, one born a princess, the other forged in chains, that would turn the entire kingdom into a battlefield drenched in betrayal, poison, and blood. If you think being a queen meant silk gowns and golden crowns, think again. In 6th century Francia, a queen didn't rule, she survived, and survival in this world came at a price. For Brunhild, the lesson came fast and cruel. Watching her sister's lifeless body carried away, she saw the reality beneath the glitter of royal halls. A crown was just a target you wore on your head. Queens couldn't command armies, they couldn't lead charges or raise swords. Their weapons were alliances, whispers, and the ability to turn favour into power. One misstep, one wrong move, and you weren't a queen anymore. You were a nun locked behind cold stone walls, or worse, a body dumped in a shallow grave. Take Thudderchild, for example. She was a shepherdess who became a queen when Paris's king, Charibert, fell for her. For a moment, she was on top of the world. But when Charibert's baby heir died, and he discarded her for a nun, Thudderchild tried to fight back. She grabbed the royal treasury and offered herself and the gold to another brother, hoping to secure her place. It should have worked. It didn't. Guntram took her treasure, laughed in her face, and sent her straight to a convent. No army, no power, no escape. For Brunhild, Thudderchild's story was a warning written in blood and broken promises. In this game, queens were pawns unless they learned to play like kings. But Brunhild wasn't just a pawn. She was watching, learning. Every betrayal, every crushed ambition around her was a map of what not to do. She still had something Thudderchild didn't: royal blood, powerful family ties, and a mind sharp enough to cut through steel. And while Fredegund sat beside Chilperic, smiling her serpent smile, Brunhild made herself a silent vow. She would not end up like Thudderchild. She would not be cast aside. She would fight. She would scheme. And she would survive, even if it meant turning the whole kingdom upside down. Galswintha's murder didn't just break a family, it shattered the fragile peace between kingdoms. For Brunhild, this wasn't politics anymore, it was blood, and blood demanded vengeance. Sigebert seized the moment. With Brunhild at his side, he rallied the Austrasian nobles. Galswintha's death became more than a personal tragedy. It was a rallying cry. Bishops thundered for pulpits, nobles sharpened swords, and poets like Fortunatus turned grief into propaganda. This wasn't just about a sister. It was about justice, honour, and seizing land, while the moral high ground was still warm. Chilperic, backed into a corner, found himself facing not just Sigebert, but also his brother Guntram, who smelled opportunity. Armies marched, cities fell. For a brief moment, it looked like Sigebert was about to crush his youngest brother and unite the Frankish kingdoms under one banner. And then, Fredegund made her move. While the battlefield raged, Fredegund wasn't sharpening swords. She was sharpening plans. No siege engines, no armies. Just two boys, a pair of poisoned daggers, and a promise of rewards their families would never live to collect. Sigebert's victory parade never came. At the height of his triumph, as he prepared to be crowned in his brother's conquered lands, the boys slipped through the crowd and struck. One stab, then another, and the king who had almost rebuilt an empire collapsed in the dirt, dead before he hit the ground. In one heartbeat, the war ended, not with banners and treaties, but with blood pooling in the dust. Sigebert's army crumbled without him. Brunhild, now a widow and mother of a child king, found herself trapped in enemy territory. Her entire world turned to ash in seconds. Rumours spread faster than the plague. Everyone knew whose hand had guided those daggers. The whispers were poisonous. Fredegund. Some said she'd brewed the venom herself. Others swore she'd used dark magic. Whether it was witchcraft or sheer ruthless genius, one thing was certain. She had just broken every rule of war and made herself the most feared woman in the Frankish world. And for Brunhild, staring at the smouldering ruins of her life, one truth burned brighter than the fire on the battlefield. This was no longer just a feud. This was war. A war not fought with swords and shields, but with betrayal, poison, and the kind of cold ambition that left no one alive long enough to tell the whole story. Sigebert's body was barely cold when Brunhild's fight for survival began. In a single night, she lost her husband, her army, and her claim to power. All she had left was her young son, 5 years old, wide-eyed and terrified. In the brutal world of 6th century Francia, a child king was less a ruler and more a death sentence. Chilperic's forces closed in on Paris, where Brunhild was trapped. The royal treasury, the lifeblood of any kingdom, was out of her reach. Gold could buy loyalty, but without it, her crown was worth nothing. Her first move was instinct, not politics: protect the boy. The escape became legend. Some say he was hidden in a basket and smuggled through the city gates. Others swear he was stuffed into a grain sack and lowered onto a boat under cover of night. However it happened, her son slipped through Chilperic's grasp and into Austrasian territory. The child would live. The crown, at least for now, would survive. Brunhild wasn't so lucky. Chilperic seized her and her daughters, stripping her of her power and sending her to a convent. For most queens, that was the end. A cold cell, endless prayers, and a slow fade into obscurity. But Brunhild wasn't most queens. Even in exile, she plotted. She leveraged her Visigothic blood, her network of allies, and the one weapon she still had, her mind. She cultivated loyalty among Austrasian nobles, weaving alliances from behind convent walls. Every prayer whispered was a plan. Every quiet nod to a visiting bishop was a seed of rebellion. Her opportunity came faster than anyone expected. Austrasia crowned her son, Childebert II, as king. He was barely old enough to hold a sword, but with the right regent, the kingdom could still stand. The nobles chose her ally Go to guard the boy, but everyone knew whose hand was really on the throne. From the convent, Brunhild became the shadow ruler of Austrasia, and once she clawed her way back to court, she didn't just survive, she mastered the game. She bought loyalty with the treasure Chilperic hadn't stolen. She forged alliances with bishops, knowing the church's blessing could make or break a crown. She played nobles against each other, turning their greed into her armor. But the biggest lesson she carried with her wasn't about power. It was about patience. She had seen queens crushed for moving too soon. She had watched kingdoms fall to reckless ambition. She knew the value of waiting, of striking only when the blade would go straight to the heart. Brunhild wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. She was building something larger, a legacy, one that would outlast husbands, brothers, and even kings. And with every calculated move, she was turning herself from a young widow into one of the most formidable political minds the Dark Ages would ever see. When the dust finally settled, the Frankish world was unrecognizable. Decades of betrayal, war, and bloodshed had reshaped a kingdom, and at the heart of it all were two women the chronicles would come to call the Dark Queens, Brunhild and Fredegund. History would try to flatten them into villains. One, a scheming seductress who killed without mercy. The other, a power-hungry widow who dragged kingdoms into war. But the truth was more complicated, and far more fascinating. Fredegund, the slave who became queen, played a game no one thought she was allowed to enter. She used cunning, fear, and ruthless precision to carve out a place in a world designed to erase women like her. Her name became a weapon, whispered with equal parts terror and respect. Brunhild, the Visigothic princess, refused to be a pawn. She survived assassination attempts, exile, and betrayal to become one of the most influential political forces of her age. Her strategies shaped alliances, treaties, and the very fabric of Frankish law. For decades, she ruled not just beside kings, but through them. Together, their rivalry rewrote the rules of power. They proved that in a world of swords and crowns, a sharp mind and an iron will could be deadlier than any army. And in the process, they left scars so deep on the Frankish kingdoms that even centuries later, chroniclers were still trying to make sense of it. But because history is written by the victors, their story was twisted. Later rulers painted them as monsters to justify their own power. Their achievements were erased, their intelligence recast as treachery, their survival as sin. Yet the truth refuses to die. It lingers in the old chronicles, in the whispered legends, in the ruins of their kingdoms. Two women who clawed their way to power in a time that had no place for them. Two queens who fought, schemed, and bled to carve their names into history with gold, blood, and fire. And as you picked the crumbling Roman roads, the smoky huts, the endless rain, remember this: in the darkest of ages, even when the world tried to silence them, they left a legacy so fierce it still echoes today.